Divorce. The word hangs in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. I never thought such a word would escape my lips, but here I am, standing in a lawyer's office, signing papers that will tear apart a life I spent 30 years building. The pen feels heavy in my trembling hand. How did it come to this? The memory crashes over me, like a wave I cannot stop. 3 months ago, I was standing in my own kitchen, holding an empty wine bottle, watching my son laugh at his wife's cruel joke. "That's Margaret, our unofficial maid," Olivia had said, her voice dripping with amusement as she gestured toward me like I was part of the furniture. "She keeps the house running." The laughter that followed felt like glass breaking inside my chest. My own son, the boy I had raised alone, the child I had sacrificed everything for, joined in that laughter without hesitation. I remember the exact moment something inside me died. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was quiet, like a light switch being turned off in an empty room. I had spent my entire life giving everything I had to Ethan, and in that moment, I realized he had never seen me as anything more than a convenience. The lawyer clears her throat, bringing me back to the present. "Mrs. Walker, are you ready to proceed with the eviction notice?" I looked down at the deed in my hands. My name, my signature, my down payment. The house that Ethan and Olivia have been living in rent-free for years, treating like their personal kingdom while treating me like their servant. "Yes," I say, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'm ready. But let me start from the beginning, because this story isn't just about that one terrible night. It's about a lifetime of small surrenders that led to one magnificent awakening. 28 years ago, I was a different woman. I had dreams once, plans that stretched beyond dirty dishes and unpaid bills. I wanted to be a teacher, to travel, to write poetry in coffee shops, and fall in love with someone who saw me as more than a caretaker. But life had other plans. When my husband left us, when Ethan was barely 3 years old, those dreams folded themselves away like letters I would never send. I remember working 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. Cleaning motel rooms at night while Ethan slept in the car, stocking grocery shelves at dawn while he played with toys I had bought at yard sales. My hands were always dry and cracked from cleaning supplies. My back ached from bending over other people's messes, but I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that once Ethan grew up, once he found his way, I would find mine again. The insurance money from my parents' death changed everything. Or so I thought. Instead of using it for myself, for the dreams I had deferred, I put every penny into a down payment for a house. A real home where Ethan could bring friends, where he could feel proud of where he lived. I signed those mortgage papers with such hope in my heart, believing I was building something beautiful for both of us. For years, it was just the two of us in that house. Ethan would sit at the kitchen table doing homework while I made dinner, and I would imagine him bringing home a nice girl someday, getting married in the backyard, raising grandchildren who would call me Nana and bake cookies with me on Sunday afternoons. I painted every room myself, planted flowers by the front door, hung family photos in the hallway. Every corner of that house was filled with my love, my labor, my hope for our future. Then Olivia arrived. I should have seen the warning signs from the beginning. The way she walked through my home like she was evaluating it for purchase, touching my things with the casual entitlement of someone who had never had to work for anything. She came from money, old money that had been passed down through generations like a family heirloom. Her parents owned 3 houses and a boat, and she had grown up believing that wealth was something you were born with, not something you earned. Ethan was completely enchanted by her world. I remember the first time he brought her home for dinner, How his eyes lit up when she talked about her family's summer house in the Hamptons, their ski trips to Aspen, the charity galas where everyone wore $1,000 dresses. He had grown up with second-hand clothes and discount groceries. And suddenly, he was being offered a glimpse into a life he had only seen in movies. Olivia never worked a real job. She called herself an entrepreneur. But what she really did was spend other people's money on elaborate schemes that never quite materialized. First, it was a blog about sustainable living, then a line of overpriced candles, then something called life coaching that seemed to involve a lot of selfies and inspirational quotes. Her parents funded every venture with the patient indulgence of people who had so much money that their daughters' failures were just expensive hobbies. But somewhere along the way, their patience began to wear thin. I learned later that they had started questioning her spending, suggesting she might need to find a real job, or at least a husband who could support her lifestyle. That's when she set her sights on Ethan with the focused intensity of a hunter who had spotted her prey. Ethan never stood a chance. He was a good-looking boy, gentle and kind, but he had inherited my tendency to put others before himself. When Olivia told him she loved him, when she painted pictures of the life they could build together, he believed every word because he wanted so desperately to be worth loving. He didn't realize that what she loved wasn't him, but the idea of having someone who would never question her, never challenge her, never expect her to be anything other than beautiful and charming. The engagement happened quickly, and the wedding was a lavish affair paid for entirely by Olivia's parents. I watched my son stand at that altar in a rented tuxedo, promising to love and honor a woman who had already begun treating him like an accessory to her carefully curated life. During the reception, I overheard her mother talking to another guest about how relieved she was that Olivia had finally found someone to settle down with. The way she said it made it clear that Ethan wasn't gaining a family so much as Olivia was solving a problem. After the wedding, they moved into my house. It was supposed to be temporary, just until they could save enough money for their own place. But saving money required earning money, and earning money required work, and work was something Olivia had never learned to do. Instead, she threw herself into decorating my home, replacing my furniture with pieces that matched her aesthetic, covering my family photos with her Instagram-worthy art, transforming every room into a backdrop for her social media presence. I watched it happen in small increments, like watching someone steal from you $1 at a time. First, it was just a few throw pillows, then new curtains, then an entire living room set that cost more than I made in 6 months. When I questioned the expense, Olivia would smile, that perfect smile, and explain how important it was to invest in your environment and create a space that reflects your values. Ethan would nod along, agreeing with everything she said, and I would find myself apologizing for caring about money as if being practical was somehow shameful. The worst part wasn't the money, though. It was the way they made me feel like a guest in my own home. Olivia would rearrange my kitchen without asking, throwing away my old dishes and replacing them with expensive sets that we were apparently too clumsy to use. She would invite her friends over for elaborate dinner parties, expecting me to cook and clean while she played hostess, taking credit for meals I had spent hours preparing. And Ethan, my sweet boy who used to help me with dishes and remember my birthday with handmade cards, slowly disappeared into someone I didn't recognize. He started speaking differently, using words like curate and brand and networking. He would correct my grammar in front of Olivia's friends, laugh at my television shows, act embarrassed when I mentioned my job at the grocery store. It was as if he had decided that everything about his old life, including me, was something to be improved upon or hidden away. The night everything changed, I had been cooking all day. Olivia had forgotten to mention that her parents were coming for dinner, and the house needed to be perfect. Of course it did. I had spent hours seasoning a roast, preparing side dishes, setting the table with the good china that I was no longer allowed to use for everyday meals. I had even gone down to the basement to retrieve a special bottle of wine I had been saving for a special occasion. When Olivia's parents arrived, they swept into my home like royalty visiting a quaint cottage. Her mother was the kind of woman who had never worked a day in her life, but somehow felt entitled to judge everyone else's choices. Her father was polite but distant, the kind of man who measured worth in bank account balances and stock portfolios. I was carrying the wine up from the basement when Olivia's mother asked the question that would change everything. "And you are?" The words were spoken with the kind of casual curiosity you might use when noticing a new piece of furniture. I stood there, holding the bottle I had bought with my own money, in the house I had paid for, wearing an apron stained with gravy from the meal I had spent all day preparing, and I realized that to her, I was invisible. "Oh," Olivia laughed, that bright, tinkling laugh that I had once thought was charming. "That's Margaret, our unofficial maid. She keeps the house running." The silence that followed felt like falling. I looked at Ethan, waiting for him to correct her, to introduce me as his mother, to say something, anything, that would restore my dignity. Instead, he laughed. Not a nervous laugh or an uncomfortable chuckle, but genuine amusement, as if his wife had made the cleverest joke in the world. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching them all laugh at my expense. Then I set the wine bottle on the counter, excused myself politely, and walked to my bedroom with as much dignity as I could gather. Behind me, the laughter continued, following me down the hallway like an echo of every small humiliation I had endured over the past 3 years. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was something deeper than angry. I was awake. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I was seeing my life clearly, without the soft filter of hope and denial that had allowed me to accept so much less than I deserved. I looked around the bedroom I had painted myself when we first moved in, remembering how excited I had been to have a real home, a place where Ethan and I could build a life together. Now that room felt like a prison, and I was the only one who had the key. The next morning, I made coffee like I always did. I fed the cat that Olivia had insisted on getting but never took care of. I watered the plants that she bought for photos but never maintained. And when she came downstairs, dressed in her expensive yoga clothes and absorbed in her phone, I was ready. I handed her all the keys. The front door, the back door, the garage, the mailbox. Everything. "What's this?" she asked, her perfectly manicured eyebrows drawing together in confusion. "Good luck paying the mortgage," I said, my voice calm and clear. And then I walked past her, down the hallway lined with photos I had framed and memories I had made, and I left. I didn't take anything but my purse and the coat I had worn when I brought Ethan home from the hospital 28 years ago. I didn't slam the door or make a scene. I simply walked away from a life that had never truly been mine towards something that might finally be. Behind me, I heard Ethan calling my name, his voice rising in panic as he began to understand what was happening. But I didn't stop. I had spent my entire life stopping for other people, and I was done. The apartment I moved into belonged to my great-aunt Ruth, who had passed away the year before and left it to me in her will. I had never visited it while she was alive, too busy taking care of everyone else to make time for family connections. It was small and old, with creaky floors and wallpaper that had seen better decades, but it was mine. Completely, entirely mine. The first few weeks were the hardest. The silence was so complete it felt like being underwater. I slept on the couch because the bedroom furniture was broken. I ate peanut butter sandwiches and canned soup because I had forgotten how to cook for one person. I waited for the phone to ring, for Ethan to call and apologize, to beg me to come home. But the phone stayed silent. It was during those quiet weeks that I began to understand something important about myself. For so long, I had defined my worth by how much I could give to others, how much I could sacrifice, how much I could endure. But sitting alone in that dusty apartment, I realized that giving without receiving isn't love. It's self-destruction. I started writing in old spiral notebooks, the kind I used to buy for Ethan's school supplies. At first, I just wrote about my anger, filling page after page with all the things I wished I had said over the years. But gradually, the writing became something else. It became a way of reclaiming my own story, of remembering who I had been before I became someone else's caretaker. One day, while looking for supplies in the apartment's storage closet, I found an old metal trunk that had belonged to Ruth. Inside were letters, documents, and photographs I had never seen before. Among them was an envelope with my name on it, written in Ruth's familiar handwriting. The letter inside would change everything I thought I knew about my life. Ruth had been a nurse at the hospital where Ethan was born, and she had always had doubts about something she had witnessed that night. According to her letter, there had been confusion in the nursery, a last-minute room switch, babies taken to the wrong mothers. By the time she realized what had happened, it was too late to say anything without destroying multiple families. But she had kept copies of everything, hoping that someday the truth might matter. The DNA test results were conclusive. Ethan was not my biological son. Somewhere out there was my real child, a boy named Michael Jameson who had been raised by another family while I raised theirs. Reading that letter should have broken me. Instead, it set me free. All those years of feeling like Ethan and I were strangers, all those moments when I wondered why nothing I did seemed to matter to him, suddenly made sense. We weren't connected by blood, but I had loved him anyway. I had given him everything I had, and he had chosen to throw it away. But my real son was still out there. And for the first time in my life, I had hope that wasn't built on someone else's gratitude. Finding Michael was easier than I expected. The Jameson family still lived in the same town, and their son owned a small bookstore downtown. I started visiting regularly, not to confront him or disrupt his life, but simply to understand who he was. Michael was everything Ethan wasn't: kind to strangers, patient with difficult customers, genuinely interested in the world around him. He treated me with respect from the very first day, even though I was nothing more than a customer to him. Watching him work, seeing the gentle way he interacted with people, I understood what I had been missing all those years. This was what it felt like to be proud of your child, to see your values reflected in another person's actions. Even though I had never raised him, even though he didn't know who I was, I recognized something of myself in his kindness. Meanwhile, the legal wheels I had set in motion were beginning to turn. The house was officially mine, and I had every right to sell it. Ethan and Olivia's perfect life was built on a foundation that belonged to someone else, and that someone else was done supporting their illusions. When the eviction notice arrived, I wasn't there to see their reactions. But I could imagine Olivia's shock, her desperate scrambling to find a solution that didn't involve actual work or sacrifice. I could picture Ethan's confusion, his gradual realization that the mother he had taken for granted was not the weak, desperate woman he thought she was. Olivia's carefully constructed world began to crumble. Her parents, faced with evidence of her business failures and financial deception, withdrew their support. Her social media empire, built on borrowed money and fake success, collapsed under scrutiny. The woman who had mocked me as a maid found herself facing the possibility of actual employment for the first time in her life. But this story isn't really about revenge. It's about something much more important. It's about the moment when you stop asking for permission to value yourself and start demanding that others treat you with the respect you deserve. The day I finally told Michael the truth about our connection, we were sitting in the back room of his bookstore, surrounded by the smell of old books and fresh coffee. I had practiced the conversation 100 times, but when the moment came, the words seemed inadequate. How do you tell someone that their entire life began with a mistake? How do you explain that love isn't always enough to bridge the gap between what is and what should have been? I handed him the envelope with Ruth's letter, the DNA results, the hospital records that proved we were connected by more than chance. He read everything in silence, his face growing paler with each page. When he finished, he looked at me with eyes that were unmistakably my own. "I don't know what to do with this," he said finally. "You don't have to do anything," I replied. "I just needed you to know. We didn't become a family overnight. Relationships built on truth take time to develop, and both of us were cautious about expecting too much too soon. But we began meeting regularly, sharing stories about our lives, finding connections that had nothing to do with DNA and everything to do with choice. Michael never called me mother, and I never asked him to. The parents who raised him had earned that title through years of love and sacrifice. But slowly, carefully, we built something new, a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than obligation or guilt. Meanwhile, Ethan tried repeatedly to contact me. His messages grew increasingly desperate as his situation became more dire. He had lost the house, lost Olivia's parents' support, lost the illusion of security that had defined his adult life. But I didn't respond. I wasn't punishing him out of cruelty. I was simply done being the person who fixed everyone else's problems. When we finally did meet months later, it was on my terms. I chose the location, a neutral park where we could speak privately. I set the boundaries, making it clear that I wasn't interested in apologies or explanations. I simply wanted him to understand what had happened and why. I told him about the DNA test, about the hospital switch, about the fact that we weren't related by blood. I watched his face as the information sank in, saw him struggle to process the implications. But I also made it clear that biology wasn't an excuse for his behavior. I had loved him as my own son, and he had chosen to treat me as disposable. That choice said everything about who he was as a person. The conversation ended with no reconciliation, no tearful reunion, no promises of future contact. Instead, it ended with understanding. Ethan finally grasped the magnitude of what he had lost, and I finally felt free from the obligation to keep trying to earn his love. The money from the house sale gave me options I had never had before. I could travel, pursue hobbies, even go back to school if I wanted to. But the most important thing it gave me was the freedom to choose my own family. Michael and I continued to grow closer, and eventually, he offered me a partnership in his bookstore. Not because he felt obligated to help me, but because he valued my ideas and enjoyed my company. We created a space that felt like home, filled with books and conversation, and the kind of quiet contentment I had never experienced before. I also used part of the money to start a foundation for older women who were starting over, women who had spent their lives caring for others and needed support to begin caring for themselves. Every time I met with someone who was rebuilding her life after years of being undervalued, I remembered the woman I used to be and felt grateful for the journey that had brought me to where I was. Some people might say that what I did was cruel, that I should have forgiven Ethan and Olivia, that family is more important than pride. But I learned something important during those months of silence and self-reflection. Forgiveness doesn't require you to keep allowing the same people to hurt you. Love doesn't mean accepting disrespect. And family is something you build through choice and commitment, not something you're stuck with because of biology or obligation. The last time I drove past my old house, it had new owners and a different paint color. The garden I had planted was gone, replaced with something more modern and low maintenance. There was no trace of the woman who had lived there for so many years, no evidence of the love and labor I had poured into every corner. But I wasn't sad. Instead, I felt something I had never experienced before. I felt proud. Proud of the strength it had taken to walk away. Proud of the courage it had taken to rebuild. Proud of the wisdom it had taken to understand that sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is to stop trying to be everything to everyone else. In the end, this isn't a story about winning or losing. It's about the moment when you stop living your life according to other people's definitions and start writing your own story. It's about learning that your worth isn't measured by how much you can give, but by how much you're willing to receive. It's about understanding that love without respect is just another form of servitude. Today, I wake up in a home that is truly mine, surrounded by books and plants, and the quiet satisfaction of a life lived on my own terms. I have a son who chooses to spend time with me, friends who value my opinions, and work that brings me joy. I have learned to love myself with the same intensity I once reserved for people who couldn't see my value. And if you're reading this story while sitting in a kitchen that doesn't feel like yours, serving people who don't appreciate your sacrifices, remember this: you are not stuck. You are not too old, too poor, too dependent, or too afraid to change your life. You are simply one decision away from becoming the protagonist of your own story instead of the supporting character in someone else's. The key to your freedom is already in your hand. You just have to be brave enough to use it.